Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this CREST member webinar. We're very lucky to have Socura here today, and I will be handing over to Andrew Case and John Lodge. Andrew, the CEO, and John Lodge, the SOC Manager there at Socura, and they will be talking today about measuring the effectiveness and return on investment of security operations. So just before I hand over to Andrew, I just want to say that this is your opportunity at the end of this webinar to ask any questions that you may have from what you've heard. So please feel free to type into the question pane whilst the presentation is ongoing, or you can do that at the end, and that is no problem. And we look forward to passing those questions over to Andrew and John to answer. So thank you very much. I will stop talking now and hand over to the people that you have come to listen to. So thank you very much, and over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Debbie. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to present with you today. Really appreciate the support. But yeah, so as Debbie's mentioned, in this session today, we're going to be sharing with you kind of how we measure the effectiveness and the return on investment of our SOC operation. So I'll start off. I'll give you some context and background, kind of where we started our journey, and then I'll hand over to John. John, our SOC Manager, who's done a lot of the detailed work in actually producing these measures for us. Okay, so before we get into the detail though, just a little bit of context on who we are. So we're Socura, we provide a managed detection and response and managed SOC service. We really like to try and work as an extension of your kind of in-house teams, really have a really close collaboration there. We use our expertise to detect and contain cyber threats before they can have an impact on our customers, and our SOC's actually been independently verified as well against the CREST SOC scheme as well. Okay, so where did we start our journey? So we really started around two sets of key measures for us. First area was around kind of our contractual commitments, if you like, to our customers, and we based these on the availability of our service, i.e. making sure it's there and actually doing its job for our customers, and secondly, how quickly we can respond to incidents. So those are two kind of key measures that we started, and actually our contractual measures for our customers as well. Alongside that, we actually put in a set of measures around kind of incident volumes and false and true positive outcomes as well within the SOC, and that was really there to help us understand the load into the SOC so we can resource it appropriately. But also the false and true positive ratios are really important for us in terms of where you do have false positives. They're a great opportunity to learn more about your customer's environment. The benign activity there lets you understand a little bit more about what's happening in that environment, and of course you can use that as opportunities for tuning as well, so we can actually tune out benign activity, which again reduces the load into the SOC, which is really important for us as well. So they're kind of the really simple sets of measures that we started right at the beginning of our journey. I'll now hand over to John. John has put in a whole raft of extra measures that allows us to understand the operation of our SOC and how effective it is, but also looking for efficiencies in that process as well, so we can react quicker. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, as you mentioned, the first metric that we wanted to focus on was the volume of work that we're taking away from each of our customers. So primarily this work volume comes in the form of the number of incidents that are created. Typically, when we bring on a new service, we expect the volume of incidents to be quite high, as usually that environment hasn't been tuned yet. And as the service develops, we have a kind of a balancing act where, on the one hand, we're bringing in more log sources over time, and we're developing additional detection rules, and that has the effect of increasing the incident volume. But then on the other hand, we're putting a large focus on tuning those detection rules to remove known good activity as we gain that knowledge of the customer's environment. And what we see over time is that the tuning activities do win out over the onboarding of log sources and the creation of new rules. And the trend over time is a reduction in that incident volume for each customer. The second metric that we focus on as a priority is our time to response. So this is the time that it takes us to either determine that an incident is a false positive, or if an incident is a genuine security threat, how long does it take for us to carry out our initial response or containment actions? So these two metrics are heavily correlated, as we reduce the incident volumes and specifically as we reduce the number of false positives, we see an improvement in that time to response. We use that time to response metric not only to ensure continuous improvement of the service, but also as a metric to determine when additional resources are needed to be recruited into the SOC. The next metric that we measure is the ratio of incident severities. So we use incident severity to prioritize which incidents we deal with first. If there's ever a situation in which we have several incidents ongoing at the same time, we can see the highest severity incidents, they can be prioritized. So for this reason, it's important that incidents are created with the correct severity. So in cases where they're not, we can go back and review the tooling and the playbooks to make sure that incidents are created with the correct severity, or at least they're changed appropriately by the playbooks. And then the final metric that we measure in terms of pure workload is change requests. So although these aren't security incidents, we still need to make sure that we've got appropriate resources in place to action them. And what we're measuring with these requests is how often they're coming in, what times of the day are they coming in, and what is the nature of the request, including how urgent are they. So as I mentioned, we measure this to ensure that we've got the right resources in place, but also to make sure that those change requests aren't having an impact on response times. Do you mind? Yeah, thanks, Andy. So those are our base metrics, and the next thing that we're looking at is trends over time. So the first of these is the volume of incidents that we escalate back to the customer. So when we first bring a service on board, we typically have to escalate back to the customer more often, and this is due to the fact that we're still learning their environment. We're figuring out what is usual activity and which key employees carry out certain activities and things like that. As well as the fact, what I previously mentioned, that the incident volume overall is higher because the environment's not tuned yet. So in order to push this metric down, we do a few things. First, as I mentioned, we focus on tuning. As we bring that incident volume down overall, then the incidents that we have to escalate also reduces. Secondly, we put in processes to detect duplicate incidents. So we aim to reduce the number of incidents that we escalate to the customer anyway, but one thing that we definitely want to avoid is escalating the same thing multiple times. And then finally, we create and we build a knowledge base that we maintain for each customer. And this means that once we learn a particular behavior is expected within an environment, we no longer need to go back and ask that question again because we've recorded that. We track an additional metric to support this trend, and that is reason for escalation. And this lets us monitor why are we escalating incidents, whether that be because we need more information from the customer or because there's some response action that we haven't been given the capability to carry out, or is it just because the customer needs to be aware of a particular incident. The next trend over time that we want to focus on is the trend of false positives versus real incidents as a ratio. So we want to be able to respond to genuine security incidents in the shortest possible time. The more time that we spend working on false positives, the more potential there is to introduce a delay in the response to a real incident. So if each false positive incident is viewed as an opportunity to learn or improve our detection rules, then we will see a gradual increase over time in that real incident to false positive ratio. In some cases, though, it's not possible to tune out activity because of the nature of the alert. Means we have to verify each instance of it. But with these types of alerts, what we can still do is utilize playbooks and process improvements in order to drastically reduce the time that it takes to investigate them. So in this way, even though we might not be able to affect the actual ratio of false positives to real incidents as a number, what we can have an impact on is the ratio of time spent working on false positives versus the time spent working on real incidents. Thanks, Andy. So the goal of measuring these metrics and trends over time is ultimately to reduce cyber risk. And in real terms, that largely comes down to optimizing the response times of the analysts and reducing the dwell time an intruder gets to spend within the network before we remove them. So in order to find areas of improvement, we can monitor various steps in the incident response flow. So starting with the event creation, we can ensure that events are created, the alerts are created as soon as possible after the malicious activity actually occurs. And we can do that by making sure that we've got good detection logic, and that the windowing that we use in those logic rules is kept as small as possible. The next step there is the incident creation within our incident management portal. So we can keep the delay between these two steps as short as possible by making sure that our fetch frequency is kept high, we've got good uptimes with our integrations, and that we've got appropriate alerting in place to let us know if there are any issues with those integrations as well. The next stages are the SOC analyst ownership and the SOC analyst triage. So how long after the incident is created is it until an analyst can get eyes on and make an initial determination? And really, this kind of calls back to all of the previous points around incident volume, reduction of false positives, and appropriate severity levels. The next stage there is the SOC analyst response. So how long after ownership does it take the analyst to identify and carry out appropriate response actions? Or if there aren't any response actions required, how long does it take them then to close that incident? So we can improve this metric by making sure we've got well-defined processes, and we can improve like the investigation time of those incidents with their playbooks and automations, which can include automatic lookups and determinations of ISCs, for example. So at this point, assuming the incident is still open, the next stage is how long does it take for us to get a response if we need one from the customer? So although this metric isn't directly in our control, we can influence it. We can influence better response times from our customers by making sure that the number of incidents that we escalate to them is kept low, and then that those incidents that we do raise, they're very clear and to the point about what it is that we actually require. And then the final step in the response journey there is working together with the customer as one team. And that might be in order to identify and carry out any further response actions that are required. And the biggest part really of improving that final step there is developing a good working partnership with the customer. For example, understanding who the key points of contact are, for example, with that business to take out those actions. So finally, I just want to mention some of those specific metrics that we use. We use MTTA is our mean time to assignment. So this is how long it takes on average for an analyst to get initial eyes on an incident and take ownership of it. MTTR is the mean time to response that I mentioned before. So this is how long it takes on average across all incidents for an analyst to either close an incident if it's a false positive, or if it's a genuine incident, how long does it take them to take that initial response action? For example, quarantine a file or isolate an endpoint, things like that. Dwell time, so how long does it take between an attacker gaining initial access into the environment and then us identifying and removing them from the environment? And then finally, we look at outliers. So the average is really great to be able to identify and track trends, but the outliers allow for some lessons learned. So for example, if our mean time to assignment across all incidents is 10 minutes, and we see one incident takes much longer than that, what we can do then is we can go and look at the conditions around that time that led to that outlier being created, and then we can take steps to make sure that we don't see those conditions again in future. Brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, John. So I'll now just talk a little bit about how to kind of demonstrate that return on investment in cyber operations. It can be very challenging to kind of to quantify this, and really it's not until you've actually probably had a cyber attack that you can really put a firm number on it, but it's definitely worth trying to understand what this could look like. Probably the easiest place to start is to imagine if you had an attack and it affected your ability to actually run your operations, trying to quantify what it would cost per hour, per day, per week to not be able to actually deliver service to your customers or ship your goods. That's probably a really good place to start to try and quantify what this might look like. Alongside that, you've got to consider things such as reputational risk as well. If you were breached and you weren't able to deliver your service to your customers, how would that be perceived? What are the potential contractual impacts on that? And also, If it's well known that you had been in that position, of course, how does that affect your ability to attract new customers in the future? There are also things like the regulatory fines to consider. If you are breached and sensitive information is actually kind of actually removed from the network and shared, then you could be potentially liable from fines from the ICO, for example. So there are things like that that you can start to build up a bit of a business case on what investment in this area does look like. And it is challenging to do this, as I mentioned, but we have put together a bit of a pack around kind of the costs involved in actually building security operations and what that can look like. So hopefully this would be useful, and you can download that from our SOC operation. But again, if anyone wants any kind of support in this area, we're more than happy to kind of share our experiences with our experience in this area as well. Well, when you're looking at measures in this area, it's probably best not to try and just start measuring everything right at the start. We very much went on a journey in this area, and we're still developing new measures as we do now. So I think it's kind of, as I said, start with the basics and then build them out over time. And as you learn more information and you learn kind of what's working well in your process or not, you can start to measure those things to kind of try and quantify them and then improve them. So yeah, don't try and do it all in once, just kind of take your time, work it through steadily, I think is probably our recommendation there.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I think with all of these things, it is about gaining the knowledge, isn't it, over time as well, on how things are going to work. Because I guess for some organisations, certain ways will work, and for others, you may have to tweak it a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah, that's very true. And you've got different technology sets at play here, and you've got different business drivers. So absolutely, what we shared here will probably work for most people, but there'll probably be some very specific measures for each organisation themselves that would be appropriate as well.
Okay, that's lovely. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for those of you that have joined this morning. Obviously, we will send some information out. I will follow up with an email. You can contact us at marketing@crest-approved.org, and I can put you in touch with John and Andy for you to talk to them direct, or if they're happy, I can share their emails as well, so that you can contact them. So we will do that afterwards, and I will pass back to our presenters for a last couple of words, really.
From our perspective, just thank you very much for taking the time to listen today, and thank you very much to CREST again for hosting the webinar as well.
Oh, that's great. So thank you to you both, and thank you for coming on and taking the time out of your busy days, because I am sure they are busy as well, as is most people. So thank you, and take care, everybody. And yeah, we will be having the recording for this, so if there's any colleagues that haven't been able to attend today, please let them know that it will be available on the CREST YouTube channel shortly. Okay then, thank you, take care, bye.
Thanks, David. Bye.